we have to talk about Bakugo and his connection to the second user of One for All. This is probably the biggest connection that not too many people are putting a lot of emphasis on, which could quite literally shape the foundation of My Hero Academia, because it connects Bakugo, who is the second main protagonist in this entire story of My Hero Academia, and the user of One for All, which, if you think about it, connects Bakugo somehow to the history of One for All. But lately, as I've been rereading the events from the Paranormal Liberation War to the current events of the manga, it seems more evident that Bakugo and the second One for All user has a major connection. But before we go that deep, let's move our way backwards to the initial thing that made me think that Bakugo has a connection to the second One for All user. Hey! Wise. It all started in My Hero Academia chapter 305, which is the chapter that is titled Izuku Midoriya and Tomura Shigaraki. And in this chapter, the One for All vestiges were essentially vetting Deku and questioning him on whether he would be prepared to kill Shigaraki if need be. It's here that we finally get to understand Deku's train of thought, and that in the current predicament, he's not sure whether he will be open to killing Shigaraki or not, but the one thing that he will always be open to do is to save someone who desires to be saved. And Shigaraki, although he's killed many people, is no exception. The reason why understanding Deku's resolve is so important to the second One for All user is because his resolve is the reason why the second and third One for All user wasn't going to allow Deku to use their power. And that was expressed further in My Hero Academia chapter 310 titled Masters and Pupil, which again focused heavily on what Deku is willing or not willing to do when it comes to saving society. However, this time when we go into the One for All versus world, Koichi, who is the first One for All user, is trying to convince the second and the third One for All user to open their hearts and allow Deku to use their full power. Koichi mentioned that he needed their help, but the third One for All user immediately responded by saying that they lived through the harshest era, the height of All for One's prosperity, an era in which his control was spread unchecked. Those who were under All for One's control didn't even realize it, but our leader, who was the second One for All user, had misgivings about the future. And in order to strike back against All for One's control, the second One for All user gathered allies to fight All for One. And the third One for All user statement about the second One for All user, this is the first official time that we get to see the second One for All user's face, which immediately brings up the resemblance to Bakugo. Alongside seeing his complete hero costume with his gauntlet, you can tell that Horikoshi deliberately made it so that the second One for All user is going to have some connection to Bakugo. But more so than how they look, it's also what the second One for All user says next that made me think that this is very much something that Bakugo would say. The second One for All user told Yoichi that he saw everything that they saw. He mentioned that he sought to bring down All for One, and in that journey he extinguished so many lives in the process. And the reason as to why he did it is because in that battle, victory meant life and defeat meant death, which is the exact reason why he and the third One for All user turned their back towards Deku. Because frankly, it goes against the ideals that the second One for All users have when it comes to All for One, especially considering that in order for Deku to use the full power of One for All, the second and third One for All user has to accept the idea that Deku wants to save their mortal enemy. The same enemy who has killed thousands of people, who has been manipulated by an enemy who has killed millions of people. However, through the realization that Yoichi gave to the second One for All user, and that the only reason why he is a second One for All user is because he reached his hand out to save the brother of the most villainous creature in the entire world, All for One, the second One for All user became more open to allow Deku to use their full power. However, because of that, he and the rest of the vestiges inside of One for All witnessed the downfall of Deku. But the most interesting thing with the reaction of the One for All vestiges with regards to Deku going rogue is that the only person who is 100% okay with it was the second One for All user. And in fact, his direct words were that Deku chose the right path. No action at all is not an option, especially given the circumstances of how society gets currently running. That's just how it is for those who bear the One for All quirk. But that being said, if there's anything that can enhance Deku right now, it would be those who share his resolves and those who can also match his pace and keep running alongside him. And make sure you remember those words, because they're really important in connecting the ideals of both Bakugo and the second One for All user when it comes to the current predicament that Deku and Class A are in. If you go to My Hero Academia chapter 322, this chapter was titled Great Explosion Murder God Dynamite, which is a conclusion of Class A trying to convince Deku to come back to UA by Bakugo opening up to Deku, telling him how he truly feels about him while also apologizing for everything he has done wrong in the past. However, the first and last thing that Bakugo said was really interesting to me. Well, the first thing that he told Deku was to stop trying to win this all by yourself. He goes on to say that he always looked down on Deku because he was quirkless, but for some reason he kept feeling like Deku was just above him. Bakugo hated it so much so that he couldn't bear looking at Deku at all, and he couldn't just accept the way that he was. So he kept him at arm's length and was deliberately mean to Deku. He tried to act so superior by rejecting Deku, but every single time he kept losing the fight. And when they got to UA, nothing changed. However, in their first year, it forced Bakugo to understand Deku's strengths and weaknesses, just as Deku did for their entire lives. But in understanding where his flaws were, he wanted to apologize to Deku for everything that he has done. And to continue that apology, he tells Deku that there's nothing wrong with the path that he's walked down since inheriting One for All and following All Might's lead. However, he still isn't All Might, and Deku's resolve alone isn't enough to take down all for Shigaraki. So because of that, Bakugo says that he and Class A are there to step whenever Deku can't handle it all on his own. Because to live up to those ideals and surpass All Might, they have to save Deku, the civilians in UA, and the people on the streets, because saving people is how they win. So now we've come full circle in one portion of a Venn diagram connecting Bakugo and the second One for All user, and I hope you've caught it. But just in case you didn't, Bakugo's development has essentially molded him to the exact same character as the second One for All user, being that there seems to be an emphasis on both Bakugo and the second One for All user understanding that Deku has to do what he's doing, which is the reason why both of them advise Deku to continue doing what he's doing but allow Class A to do it with him. But in the same breath, there's also a huge emphasis on winning and what Bakugo and the second One for All user will do to win. Or not necessarily what they would do, but what is required for them to win. Where in the case of the second One for All users era, victory means to live, whereas losing means that you will die. And for Bakugo, victory means saving people, whereas defeat means that people are effectively dying. So with the connections of how they look, what they wear, and also their ideals, this makes me believe that Bakugo is the second One for All user's great-grandson of sorts. But even if that's true and Bakugo is some form of descendant to the second One for All user, then why is that important? What narrative purpose can come from Bakugo being the second One for All user? And actually, I think I have an answer. By the way, if you want to collect My Hero Academia mangas, check out my Amazon shop store where you can purchase every single volume of My Hero Academia and I get a small commission for your purchase. The link will be in the description and also in the pinned comment. Now obviously the main thing that I would say is Bakugo is going to somehow help Deku learn how to use his quirk, which is not saying that the second One for All user has the exact same quirk as Bakugo, but it can very much be similar in nature, being that they have similar support items. However, outside of helping Deku, I believe that the reason why Bakugo having a connection to the second One for All user is so vital is linked to Bakugo's final opponent, which also connects to the history of One for All in general. Now, if you don't know, I am of the belief that All for One is going to be Bakugo's final battle. Throughout the entire series of My Hero Academia, there has been a lot of tension between Bakugo and All for One, especially in the events of the Pearl Nebula Liberation War arc, when All for One quite literally stabbed Bakugo and quite literally calling him trash and a useless piece of life. However, there's also one line that All for One said to Star and Stripe that also makes me believe that there is some form of connection between him and Bakugo and subsequently the second user of One for All. Towards the end of the All for One versus Star and Stripe battle, where Star and Stripe's vestige was being destroyed inside of the All for One vestige world, she told All for Shigaraki that as long as people stand up to save each other, someone will inherit the will of heroism, and they will strike All for Shigaraki down. But All for One's response was quite interesting, because he immediately said, "Give it a rest. The winner is the one who lives the longest. So take a hike, dead lady," which is easily a killer bar, but it's really interesting considering the fact that it connects to the same ideals of the second One for All user, in which he quite literally says, in battle, victory meant life and defeat meant death. But what's more interesting to me is what he said before that, which is that he desired to take down All For One, so much so that he killed so many other people. And if you look through the flashback of the second One For All user saving Yoichi, the most noticeable thing that isn't present is the scar that he has on the cross of his face. What all of this initially tells me is that outside of All Might himself, who actually defeated All For One, the second One For All user is the only person who quite literally had a strong burning desire to take out All For One. And not only was he the only One For All user who had a strong desire to take down All For One, he effectively tried to, and in my belief, it's possible that he gave All For One somewhat of a run for his money, but in the end, he couldn't live up to the ideals that both he and All For One shares, which is that to win means to live and to lose means to die, leaving a giant gash on his face but a ridiculously strong will. Now, how does this connect to Bakugo in some way, shape, or form? Pretty much, I believe that Bakugo could be in some way, shape, or form inheriting the will of his ancestor, the second user of One For All, where he already has a burning desire to win, he already has a burning desire to take down All For One ever since the events at Kamino, and he's also directly connected to One For All with Deku. And I believe that as My Hero Academia runs to its conclusion, Bakugo, similar to Deku and Shoto, are taking the mantle of their ancestors or predecessors and are going to complete the mission that everyone else fell short on, which is Deku taking out the All For One quirk and Shigaraki, and Bakugo taking out All For One. But you need to be taking out this video right here because it talks about more My Hero Academia stuff. Wing His Own every single